the project is not looking to bring in aircraft that would violate the 1976 agreement, and the developer voluntarily decided to limit the size of aircraft that could come into the airport today. And so what this project does do is it conforms to the many type of businesses already in operation on the airfield today, and that actually could serve the type of aircraft that there's some concerns about. It will provide additional commercial hangars to support increased aircraft storage needs, which is consistent with the master plan from 2010. That it was anticipated that project was actually added in 2010, and I guess the last point I'd like to make on here, and I've already mentioned the agreement, is that some of the most concerns, and Judy will get to it, is that this project itself, if we heard anything was about noise and air pollution concerns, that for this project that they didn't even meet the thresholds of significance. So the project has been 10 years in the making. This isn't something that has just been thrown together. It's been before the public in multiple avenues, and also has been before the Advisory Commission, the Camarillo Airport Authority, and the Board of Supervisors. And so we are happy to invite Ms. Krause up to speak to the environmental documents, and she has a presentation. And we'll get into some of the details.
Thank you, Erin, and good evening, authority members. Thanks for hanging with us so late. So my name is Judy Krause. I'm an environmental planner associate with Kaufman Associates, and thanks. I was asked to just go over the findings of the mitigated negative declaration and initial study that was completed on the Cloud9 project. Before I do, I just wanted to provide a little bit of context with the California Environmental Quality Act, which is called CEQA. And I apologize if this is information you know, but it seems like there's been confusion in the public, so I just wanted it to go on the record. So CEQA requires, unless a project's actually exempt, that you start with an initial study. An initial study is basically a checklist that looks at a variety of environmental resource categories and asks you to decide if there is no impact, less than significant impact, a potentially significant impact. And then if there is a potentially significant impact, could that be mitigated below a level of significance? CEQA also allows a lead agency to develop their own checklist and requires that the lead agency come up with thresholds of significance. So for Ventura County, they have a very thorough environmental initial study checklist that's actually probably the most extensive one I've seen. And they also have thresholds for construction impacts, operation impacts, and cumulative impacts. So that's the form that we used for the Cloud9 project. It's the form we used for the Northeast Hangar project that the county approved last year, or 2 years ago, I think. And that this project was part of that project as well. So hopefully that helps understand where we're at. A mitigated negative declaration was determined by the county as a result of the initial study findings, which means that there were a few impacts that could be potentially significant if not mitigated, but there's mitigation that would bring them below a level of significance. That's why an environmental impact report wasn't required. Okay. Erin, I forgot what you told me. The red turns it? There we go. Okay. So Erin talked about this a little bit, but in September of 2016, the proposed project, meaning the Cloud9 project, was included in the initial study and mitigated negative declaration that was adopted for the Camarillo Airport Northeast Hangar project. That's because the county had, I think, 108 acres, but they also had these 7 acres that they earmarked because of the previous master plans for corporate hangar development. And the field studies that were done at the time, biology, cultural resources, included that area in the studies. So we were able to look at the impacts that could occur to that area of the airport being developed for corporate hangars at kind of a programmatic level, but we didn't have a site plan or a specific project description. So this project, the Mitigated Negative Declaration and Initial Study that we're asking you to consider now, looks at those detailed pieces of the project that we now know. What's the size of the project? What's the footprint? How much traffic will it come? What kind of aircraft could it accommodate? What would the emissions be? What would the noise be? All of this is included in the initial study or the backup documentation. So I just wanted to point that out. There was also a geotech study done and a traffic study. So all of that information is part of the Mitigated Negative Declaration and Initial Study that we're bringing forth to you today. In October of 2019, we finished the draft initial study and circulated it for public review according to CEQA and county guidelines. In February 2020, we put together the draft final that's before you today. The difference between the two are a couple appendix. Appendix D includes all the public comments that were received, and I'll go over a slide that breaks that down for you. The responses that we have prepared in accordance with CEQA. And then Appendix E contains the mitigation monitoring and reporting program for this mitigated negative declaration. I also wanted to mention, so there were all these impacts that we looked at. I'm only going to focus on the ones that the initial study came up with as potentially significant. Everything else was determined to be less than significant or no impact, again, based on the county's thresholds of significance. So the first one was air quality during construction. The county air pollution control district thresholds for ozone precursors, which are reactive organic compounds or nitrogen oxides of nitrogen, is 25 pounds per day. When we ran the model based on the construction analysis, it could be more than 25 pounds per day of NOx. With mitigation, which is standard by the Air Pollution Control District, that number comes back down below the threshold. So these are standard mitigation measures that were actually required as the previous mitigated negative declaration on the county hangars. They're also required for this project. Biological resources. If you've been out there and you know the county parked cars out there for quite a while, it's hard to imagine that any migratory birds would nest there. But once rodents come in and make burrows, sometimes owls will go there. So there is a potential take of migratory birds if the project starts their ground disturbance during the nesting season. These, again, are standard mitigation measures that were required for the previous project as well as this one. And the nearby wetlands is actually the Camarillo Hills Drain. So there's county watershed protection policies that protect this. And again, best management practices, if there was an accidental spill of fuel or something like that during construction, would be required. There was a geotechnical study done, and there are recommendations in that study that would be required for the project. And then the last potentially significant impact is a cumulative impact for traffic. This is, the report looked at both the city of Camarillo and the county's traffic thresholds. And this is really a worst case because 40 vehicular PM peak hour trips from a hangar project is probably really never going to happen. But we use the Institute of Transportation Engineer rates. And that's what it came up with. So that's what the report shows as kind of a worst case analysis. And the mitigation is the county traffic impact mitigation fees. So those are all the mitigation measures that are included in this mitigated negative declaration. And that's what's in the mitigation reporting program. Sorry, I know it's late. My brain's a little disconnected, and I know yours is too after all that. Okay, so here's the just a breakdown of the public comments that we got during the public review period. It was available for a 30-day review. The airport received one comment letter from the city of Camarillo, one comment letter from a stakeholder's legal representation, and numerous emailed comments from the members of the public that came in response to a public ad that was placed in the paper by a stakeholder, I guess. I don't know exactly who put it. It wasn't a county ad. And so they emailed based on that information, not really necessarily the initial study. The city of Camarillo, as a result of the city's comments, there were minor revisions made to the text of the initial study. They wanted a reference to the Joint Powers Agreement. That's on page A1 of the draft final. All of these changes are in red, so you can easily find what the revisions are between the draft and the final. They also had minor word changes to some of their permit procedures and the way we referred to things like the Camarillo Sanitary District. The second letter that we received was from A to C Law. They're representing Airport Properties Limited. They had comments really related to their interpretation of CEQA, the adequacy of the notice of availability, the project description, the noise and vibration analysis. They did not really provide any substantial evidence to overthrow the analysis that had already been done for the initial study. So there were no revisions made to the draft based on their comments. There are responses, though, to their comments in Appendix D. So the public comments really focused around these 4 issues. There was verbalized opposition to 737 aircraft at the Camarillo Airport or questions about the Joint Powers Agreement. They had concerns about noise, vibration, pollution, or just general quality of life impacts from large aircraft at the airport. There were questions or concerns about the public notice or the process. And then there were some concerns from existing tenants at the airport asking how this project might affect their hangars or their operations. So what we did is we listed every email comment in a matrix and indicated which of these 4 topical comments they had. Some of them had more than one. And then for a response, we drafted topical responses to address these issues. And that's it. I'm glad to answer any questions that you might have.
I have a question. So you have these mitigation procedures, for lack of a better term, for bird life and all these things. And I guess my question is, being somewhat of a skeptic, so trust but verify. So is there an agency or a firm or somebody that's saying, okay, you know, we promise to do these bird counts and all these steps to protect the environment and the population? Is there a process for making sure that all gets done independently?
Yes, there is. So that's the purpose of the mitigation monitoring and reporting program, and it's something that the lead agency, which would be the Board of Supervisors, will adopt in addition to the mitigated negative declaration. And it really is a form that allows the county to document when each of the mitigation measures are taken care of. It would be subject to a public FOIA act. Specific to the migratory birds, California Department of Fish and Wildlife has specified protocol, especially for the burrowing owl. And so they have oversight specifically for that topic.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Additional questions? Yes.
With respect to, you mentioned it earlier, the burrowing owl and rodents, what's the rodent control plan and how do we mitigate that at the airport?
Aaron or Kip might want to jump in, but I believe the airport has a wildlife hazardous mitigation plan that they implement.
So our maintenance department disperses. There's oats that go out that helps with the ground squirrels and the rabbits and stuff like that.
Is it successful?
Yeah.
Thank you. That's my question.
Any additional questions? No?
Okay,
Thank you very
thank
much.
you.
If there are no additional questions of staff, then we'll move on to public comment. I do have a few public comments here. Robert Oliver, you are up. Just went to the restroom? All right, well, I'll put him second. Then Mark Sullivan, I'll let you, you're up. And Nick Martino, you're on deck. Unless Mr. Oliver gets back, in which case, then I'll let him go.
Good evening. Pardon me. Good evening again. I'm Mark Sullivan. I'm speaking here as an individual. I'm an East County resident, having lived there for 37 years. I've heard a couple of statements tonight, as I heard at the Aviation Advisory Commission, that to me are really quite shocking. Specifically, that this has been 10 years in the making, and that there's going to be a voluntary limit on the activity at the airport. It's being presented as if in 2010, a decision was made that airliner-size aircraft would be based at this airport. Well, that comes as a big surprise to me. And I think in East County, where people are protesting planes flying over at 4,000 feet to LAX, that in Supervisor Huber's district, when they start coming over Simi Valley and down the Santa Rosa Valley to land on runway 26, that there's going to be a public outcry. The big issue I have with this is that we've talked about burrowing owls and we've talked about all these other things. We heard that the indication that 25 pounds of nitrous oxide a day is a significant number in Ventura County. We don't have the data because they've done the study, but they've indicated that the construction equipment will put out 45 pounds of nitrous oxide a day. Now, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know that a CFM56 turbine on a 737 puts out tremendous amounts of nitrous oxide, and there's 2 of them on each airplane. The federal law is pretty clear that the only authority a local agency has is under basically nuisance law. You determine land use here, and once you determine land use restrictions, those are enforceable. But once you allow a use to be based at your airport, you've basically given up control. And essentially, if you allow the basing of airliner-sized aircraft at the airport, there's going to be no limit. Anybody that wants to add more airplanes, it's a very simple lawsuit. Federal money was put out to build the facilities, and they want to bring in their airplanes, they'll be able to bring in their airplanes. The most telling point to me is that the 2016 study that this is all hinged on says 0 about large airplanes. In fact, it says when this facility's built, that Cloud9's proposing there'll be a separate study. Well, it's never been done. There's never been an analysis of vibration, of nitrous oxide emissions, and of overflight. I would note that the Bible is the California Airport Land Use Planning Handbook of 2011. It's not just a handbook, it's a matter of law, it's binding. And it says these items need to be addressed. They've never been addressed. The telltale issue to me is that 2016, they get approval for nested hangars. No one has any problem with the GA hangars. No one has a problem with executive jets. 2017, there's a change in the design to make it design group 3 to bring in the big airplanes. That was never presented to anybody, and it's not addressed in any of the mitigated negative declaration documents. I submit that the public is entitled to have the lease state that the maximum takeoff weight will be 115,000 pounds.
Thank you. Is Robert Oliver back? You're up, Robert. And Nick Martino, you're on deck.
Good evening. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. My name is Robert Oliver. I'm the CEO of Air 7, which is one of the FBOs on the airport. I've been in business for a lot longer than I'd like to admit, and then the last 45 years I've owned several aviation companies, managed them, and had as many as 120 airplanes on my certificate at one time. So a lot of experience in this field. Camarillo Airport's kind of a unique airport. It's not really a destination airport. I just heard this gentleman speak and say some things that I take issue with about the larger planes coming in here. You got to have a reason to come here. They don't come here because most of them want to be close to Van Nuys. They want to be close to Burbank. They want to be close to LAX. This is kind of a unique airport that it serves the Santa Barbara and the Malibu area. So we don't get a lot of those airplanes coming over this way. Every once in a while, you'll see a Navy C-40 come in, which is a 737, and they reduce their weight to get in and get out. And so we need facilities that draw corporate aircraft in. The hangars won't hangar 737s, so no one's going to want to put one over here if you can't put it in a hangar. I've gotten to know Ron the last couple of years and find him to be a very honorable person. And he built this complex, as was said to you earlier, to avoid those type aircraft coming in and being hangared here. We need that traffic to come out here. The FBOs that exist here now don't have enough traffic to support our. The only thing you make your money in the FBO business is hangaring, rent, some maintenance, and fuel cells. So the more aircraft you can get to come into this airport, the better it's going to support the FBOs that are already here. And so I encourage you to pass this, get this project done. It's a world-class operation. I've been on the Scottsdale Airport, the Van Nuys Airport, Burbank Airport, Long Beach Airport, and this airport. And I think this airport has a great opportunity to grow with a world-class operation like Cloud9, and you'd be doing the airport community and the local community a disservice if you didn't approve this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Oliver. Mr. Martino, you are up, and I have Robert, is it Kwong, on deck.
Thank you, Commissioner and authority members. My name is Nick Martino. I represent RKR Incorporated, the responsible party for the Cloud9 development. It's late, and it's been a long night, so I won't go on too long. I just wanted to address the obvious issues brought up, some of them tonight, the 737s. It's already been mentioned. We voluntarily, designed the hangars with a 28 and change foot door. The tail height of a 737 is 41 foot 3 inches. That was our choice, and we stand by that choice. And we made that choice for a couple different reasons. Most importantly, because the constituents matter. And we appreciate everyone's input in the process, and we appreciate the Hangar Owners Association getting involved. We appreciate the process that has brought some of this stuff to light. Even the city, although we might not see eye to eye, it certainly has shed some light on some of the things. Again, the Joint Powers Agreement, 1976 Joint Powers Agreement, is a separate document that I understand, it's been brought up a number of times. I have to go on the record as saying that we would not support an amendment to any of our documents that would include compliance with the 1976 agreement. It's a 45-year-old document. It's approaching 45 years old. And it's tough for us to go back and interpret what specifically was the intent of certain subsections in Appendix B. And, I'd like to reference that there's the master plan coming up, which we talked about earlier in the night. And RKR would really support both the city, the county, the hangar owners, and all stakeholders getting together to kind of iron out some of these issues rather than retroactively amending leases and, kind of making these knee-jerk reactions. And so I really think that process is going to benefit everybody collectively, everyone on the airport, including the storage hangars, the large commercial hangars, and anyone that intends to build in the future as well. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Martino. Mr. Kwong, you are up, and I have Mr. Brian Pierik on deck.
Good evening, Camarillo Airport Authority. Robert Kwong, A to Z Law for APL. Every day and every night in the United States of America, we're reminded that we live under and by the rule of law. This is a bedrock principle for our constitutional democracy that makes it work and thrive for all people. One aspect of the rule of law is that everyone, even the government, must abide by and be held accountable by the law. The governing law in this case, right now, right here, is the California Environmental Quality Act and the CEQA guidelines. And I'm here before you to ask that you vote to recommend to the Board of Supervisors not to take any one of the 6 actions recommended by staff. Not to take any one of those 6 actions. The reason why is because CEQA documents, especially MNDs and EIRs, are primarily full disclosure documents that inform the public and their elected officials, some of the many of you who sit right there right now. And that's right out of the Laurel Heights case the California Supreme Court indicated as the governing principle for CEQA. And I'm saying that the document before you right now is a flawed document for two basic reasons. Number one, improper tearing off of a previously prepared CEQA document. There is a statement within the MND before you that relies on 14 California Code of Regulations 15-152. And basically that says this, quote, "Tiering refers to using the analysis of general matters contained in a broader EIR with later EIRs or later negative declarations on narrower projects, incorporating by reference the general discussion from those broader EIRs." They're tearing off of an MND from 2016. An MND, by definition, is not a broader EIR that discusses issues such as cumulative impact and project alternatives. Does not do any of that. The second reason why this is a flawed document is that there's an unstable, incomplete, and inconsistent project description. In the case of the Burbank-Glendale-Pasadena Airport Authority versus Hensler, it was found that an unstable project description fails as an informational document. That's exactly what you have here. Because in the response to comments, they refer to the lease option that RKR has with the airport, Department of Airports, as being the basis for restricting the project and making sure that it does not cause any significant environmental impacts. That was not in the project description in the MND, in the draft MND. They're changing the project description, and most importantly, at the Advisory Commission, when RKR was asked, will you sign a condition within that lease saying you will not bring Boeing business jets in there? He deferred, he demurred, he would not go there. Well, if this is going to be a project that mitigates itself by its description, it needs to have it. So for those reasons, this is a flawed document, and I also would just, final point.
Thank you very much.
20 appellate court cases based on 15-152 have all been used with EIRs on a programmatic basis, not MNDs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kwong. Mr. Brian Pierik, you are up. I am out of comment cards after Mr. Pierik, so if anyone else wants to speak, please turn in a comment card now.
Again. Got the same handout? I don't know.
He's gone.
I may.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Budget saves too much. Thank you. Oh, I saw this.
Thank you.
She said she added.
So my name is still Brian Pierik, and I'm still the city attorney of Camarillo. And I thank you for your indulgence. I know the hour's late. The pages that I've handed you here are from your agenda packet, including the first document, which is the first page of the November 20th, 2019 letter from the city to the Department of Airports with the city's comments on the MND. I call your attention to the fact that under number 1, it talks about the agreement of 1976. At the bottom, we say that the ISMND fails to acknowledge the agreement and the aforementioned airport restrictions contained in Exhibit B of the agreement as applicable land use regulations. So the agreement, if you go to the next page, page 2, this comes from page D7 of the final MND. That's the 1976 agreement. I apologize if for some reason that wasn't made clear in my earlier comments, but this is not an agreement that is that I've just pulled out of the air. This is one that's in your packet and has been in the MND with the city's comments back in November. Now, the next page. This is where the city's concern is. You heard from the speaker earlier about how the county has addressed, the Department of Airports has addressed the city's concern about the 1976 agreement. This is page 3, where they talk about insert A1 to the final IS. All that paragraph does in the italics is say that there is an agreement. It doesn't say anything about any requirement that the project comply with the 1976 agreement. So now go to page 4, and this is the crux of the matter. Here what I've done is I've cut and pasted the italicized text from the prior page, and we've added the underlined text, which reads that the project must comply with the restrictions in the agreement, referring to the 1976 agreement, except to the extent, if at all, a term or restriction of the 1976 agreement is preempted by federal or state law. So we are asking that that sentence be included. Mr. Turner attended a city council meeting and was very patient in responding to many questions from the various members of the city council, and very informative. This document was presented to him at that time. The question was asked whether or not that could be included as part of the MND, and my recollection is he said that that would have to be something that he would review. So I'm reaffirming the request of the city that the document that you see here, which is page 4, which comes from the MND, the italicized text, add this sentence to acknowledge that the MND will comply with the 1976 agreement, and if there's a need for it to comply with some agreement between the city of Oxnard and the county of Ventura, perhaps that could be added. So that's the sum and substance of my comments. I can answer questions if you have any.
Do any authority members have questions at this time?
Well,
Seeing-
he said all this stuff was in my packet. I don't know. Had the wrong document a while ago. Am I missing something? Did I not get that in my packet?
Well, these pages come from the MND, which, as what I'm understanding, you're here to recommend to the county. So D2, that's from the MND. That's page 1. Page 2 is D7.
So
She's talking about your letter.
Pardon me?
She's talking about your letter, so what you gave us
Yes.
is the first page, but
Yes.
there's this, there's more to this letter,
Well,
correct?
there is, but I wasn't going to give you a big stack of paper because the
Oh, okay.
letter is several pages long.
There you
because-
go.
Because somebody decided to write it a long letter, and I won't say who, and it had a bunch of attachments to it. So
I
in the
gotcha.
interest of brevity, rather than hand you a thick stack of papers, I attached the letter, and the significant part of it is what you see at the bottom that I asterisked, if that's a word, to say that the agreement doesn't acknowledge, that the MND doesn't acknowledge the requirement for the 1976 agreement.
Thank you. That's what we were looking for.
Right. So this is, those first 3 pages are from the MND, and then page 4 is the text of the MND that's in italicized, and then this last sentence that we're asking to be added to the recommendation that you give to the county with respect to the MND. So basically that it be added to the comments. That's our request.
Yeah, the M&D in whole wasn't explicitly included in our packet. It's referenced as Exhibit 1 in the staff report, and there's simply a link that's made reference to where it can be found.
So I have a question.
Yes.
Or is it time for?
Yes, this is absolutely time for questions.
Okay, so my question is that there has been this request from the city of Camarillo, the council, and I'm not exactly sure what the response was from the Department of Airports. It seems to have been, we'll study the matter, or we'll take it under review, or...
I'll let Mr. Turner speak for himself, but what I heard him say at that city council meeting was when we raised what you see now as page 4 of what I handed out to you, and we showed that to Mr. Turner, he said that he would review it, and he wasn't prepared to make a commitment at that meeting. He said he would need to review it. That's what I remember him saying.
Okay, so I guess my question is where are we now, and has it been reviewed, and is it something that's being considered, or it's off the table, or where are we now?
I take
That's a question for Mr. Turner.
So your comments directed towards staff.
Okay. We have reviewed that, and we would not be able to honor that request. I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
I'm sorry, I said we have reviewed that, and we would not be able to honor that request.
Okay, is it considered a moot point, or is it not my privy to know the reason, or?
Per council, it would not be to the benefit of the county's interest to add that.
Okay, based on legal advice, okay.
Yes.
Mr. Zaragoza.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question maybe for Tom or for Kip. I understand that A to Z, Robert Kwon said that the MMD or the CEQA process was flawed, and is that correct? How I don't understand how it could be flawed, you know, or do we have an explanation for that? You know, because back in 2016, you know, this whole thing was, you know, well, not this one was not approved, but, you know, it was approved by the Board of Supervisors. But my question is, why would it be flawed, you know?
I don't know. I don't see the merit in Mr. Kwong's argument.
So there's really no merit in that?
As far as I can see, no.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
You have an expert there.
Do you have a comment? Thank you. I figured.
Colin jumping out.
Yeah.
I would like to provide a clarification on the comment that Mr. Kwan had about the tiering in section 15152 of CEQA. While he's correct that that section does refer to EIRs, that's not the section that we're using here. If you go to section 15063 of the guidelines, which is the section on initial studies, one of the things that it says about getting your results for your initial study, I'll just read it to you. It says, determine pursuant to a program EIR, tiering, or another appropriate process, which of a project's effects were adequately examined by an earlier EIR or negative declaration. So there are sections in the CEQA guidelines that allow you to use a previous negative declaration to inform your initial study, and that's what we've done in this situation.
So, okay, thank you. So I have some, so we can deliberate now and ask questions, Mr. Chair.
Well, yeah, let me see if there are additional questions.
Because I have some other. Go ahead. What?
You know,
Yes?
I have some as well, but if you want, you have further questions, or you want to
Yes.
deliberate? Oh, yeah, by all means.
Or maybe deliberate. If they have additional questions, then we go ahead and go that route, because I have some questions that I'd like to ask, you know.
You're free
Let me
to ask
some
questions. You can go ahead and ask questions.
Okay. I think Aaron mentioned that there was no 737s that are proposed by Cloud9, number one. And there's no changes to the Camarillo Airport because of Cloud9. And also, there's no violation of the 1976 agreement between Camarillo and the county. And of course, you know, the Board of Supervisors and the Airport Authority approved this project a while back. And we, again, this is adopted and approved by the BOS, the Board of Supervisors, on 2016. So are we okay with that? That we still, is that correct?
Yes, sir, it is. And it was also, the lease was approved in 2018 for this, which also went through all of the same processes that you see before you tonight.
And I remember, too, when this was first brought up, you know, we had some members of the Camarillo Airport Authority said this was a great project, that it was going to help the Las Posas road, you know, and also that it was going to improve the traffic from the 101 to PV Road, and I still remember one of the council members from the Airport Authority mentioning that too, and I still remember that. Just for information.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Do other authority members have some questions? I do have a few myself. I am looking for some clarification on some comments that were made. So I heard staff say that Cloud9 has no intention of operating or servicing Boeing business jet 737s.
Is that a question, yes or no?
Yeah, no, I'm just confirming that's what I heard.
Is that correct?
That is what they've stated.
Okay. I'm trying to reconcile that with, and I'll back up and say that this is probably what what initiated the interest and concern on behalf of the city of Camarillo. On page A4, and haven't handed it out to anyone, but on page A4 of the Cloud9 initial study project description, in the very last paragraph, midway, it says, of the facility, this depth can accommodate an aircraft such as the Boeing Business Jet 737-800 or a Gulfstream G650, two of the largest aircraft that are anticipated to use the airport. So it seems like there is an intention to, well, one, for a Boeing Business Jet 737, specifically 800, to utilize the airport. It seems like this facility is intended to accommodate such aircraft. And then on page B3 of that similar document, on table B2, Cloud9 hangar aircraft at the Camarillo Airport, it asks RKR to, in their analysis, to essentially identify how many annual operations they anticipate of different jets, different types of jets. And they have a whole list here: Falcon 7X, Hawker 800, a C-12. They do have, for a G650, they anticipate 312 annual operations. For a business Boeing jet, or a Boeing business jet, they also anticipate about 312 annual operations. I'm trying to reconcile the statement of they have no intention of servicing those kind of aircraft with the fact that those aircraft are explicitly listed as being, utilizing the airport, and of which this facility would accommodate use of.
Right. Yeah, and I understand your confusion. So let me address it the best I can, and then you can ask more questions if you want. In the project description, the paragraph that you're referring to is speaking about the pavement, not the hangars. So because the airport is an ADG3 airport, the FAA will require that the pavement is constructed to that strength. And so this ramp could accommodate a Boeing business jet or a 650. There's not room in the hangar, but they could park on the ramp. So that's one piece. That's why that's in the project description. The other reason is because those aircraft do operate at the airport, so we can't rule out that they would never go over there for whatever reason. So then you go over to the aircraft analysis that we did, which we use the Aviation Environmental Design Tool, just stipulated by FAA as their methodology for looking at aircraft emissions and noise emissions. And the methodology that you use is you look at what the base fleet mix is at the airport. Okay, so you look at that, you model that, and then you add to it what could be associated with the project. So the base level has those larger aircraft in it. And then what we did is we assumed a very worst case analysis so that we could see if there was any of the larger aircraft associated parking over there with Cloud9. We looked at a helicopter, we looked at a G650, and we looked at a Boeing business jet to see what kind of noise contour that would have. And that's what's reported in the document. It does not go over any residential areas. So we feel confident that the analysis and the mitigated negative declaration and initial study looks at the most worst case that could ever be associated. If anybody wanted to challenge the document, we have the substantial evidence in the document that shows that even if that happened, there's not a significant threshold triggered for air quality or noise. It's hard because people that don't do CEQA don't understand the links you have to go to show the worst case analysis and make it really watertight.
So the comment was made that the facility, the hangar itself, can't accommodate. Let's stick with the 737 because that seems to be the most popular and most intrigue to people.
Too tall, right?
It can accommodate the wingspan, but it cannot accommodate the tail.
Right.
By how much approximately, do we know? And that's the for lack of a better word, the garage door.
Yeah.
Right. Does the hangar beyond the initial, let's say, access hole access garage door. Is the hangar significantly taller on the inside?
Maybe just briefly. So it's actually two structures. We modeled it after the 2011 master plan, which had the 250,000 square foot hangars. And so it's actually two superstructures with a pitched roof, and the doors are offset from the peak. And so the doors are essentially, there's two doors per hangar. And so the way that the hangar is engineered, the main supports run down the center of the hangar with the peak of the roof. So there's poles, pillars. So to answer your question is, even if we wanted to, because I think that's where you're going, modify the door to accommodate it, we couldn't. Yeah, and so that's been a question that's been asked by some of the hangar owners associations. We've been really clear. No, and it's definitely not something that RKR is interested in doing whatsoever. And I'll be honest with you, when you look at engineering these hangars, which we look at all different ways of doing it, I'm gonna be honest with you, it's not financially feasible either for the amount of Boeing 737s, private Boeing 737s that actually exist out there. It's a very small number. So it's like you'd be making millions of dollars, millions and millions of dollars in modifications to accommodate, a very, 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 very small amount, of capable aircraft. So to answer your question, no, we can't do it.
Thank you. I did have some questions, and I know it came up from a speaker in regards to the 1976 agreement. And earlier in the earlier in the night, there was, soon it'll be day. And I'm getting to my point into the end. Exhibit B of the 1976 agreement, titled Camarillo Airport Restrictions, and it lists six very specific restrictions. Is it, and Mr. Martino, I know you kind of speak on behalf of RKR and Cloud9 and the project. Somewhere the comment was made that there's no intention. In addition, there's no intention of servicing or accommodating large jets like the Boeing 737. There is no intention of RKR or the Cloud9 project to violate or to operate outside the confines of the 6 items in Exhibit B of the 1976 agreement?
RKR doesn't operate any aircraft.
Is it their intention to accommodate any aircraft that operate outside those confines?
Specifically, if I recall, the confines are 1, the airport will not be used for commercial use as defined by the Civil Aeronautics Board. That board doesn't exist anymore. So I don't know that RKR is in a position that just doesn't exist anymore. I believe number 2 is that the airport will be operated from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. I don't believe that's the standard of curfew that the airport operates under anymore. The published curfew is midnight to 5 a.m. voluntary. I believe number 3 was the pattern will be operated to the south of the airport. The FAA has the sole discretion of directing aircraft in the air. RKR has no ability to do that. Number 4 is the weight limitation shall be 15,000 pounds.
115?
115,000 pounds dual wheel. The 5010 for the airport, the 2011 master plan, both indicate that the airport's weight-bearing limitation is 125,000 dual tandem. So even if RKR said, yes, we want to operate within that 115,000 pound limitation, we don't operate aircraft, and pilots are going to operate based on what the FAA and the airport, was provided during the airport master plan in 2011, which is 125,000 pounds. Whether or not that plane is actually over or below, RKR would have no way of knowing that. And so we're not the operator for the aircraft. And number, I think 5 or 6 was the area development of the airport will be, to accommodate the 60 decibels in a 90 decibel single event. And CEQA does a pretty good job of outlining that, as well as Part 150 of the FAA, as well as 161 process, as well as 5190 6B in the FAA's airport management plans. So
Good memory.
yeah. Well, unfortunately, I've had a lot of exposure in a short amount of time. And so just to summarize that, RKR can have, and this is just the blatant truth. RKR has all the intentions of the world of providing a world-class facility that the community can be proud of and will be proud of, and we are going to operate within the confines of our the restrictions that are placed in front of us, as our lease says. And so, but if there's two conflicting documents, it kind of puts RKR between a rock and a hard place, and that's why we support the airport's master plan, the city and the county coming together, and other stakeholders coming together to sort those issues out and maybe revamp that 1976 Joint Powers Agreement.
Thank you. Is it the airport's intention to enforce the 1976 agreement? And let me follow up with that. Is it the airport's belief that the 1976 agreement is enforceable and valid?
I think Nick has raised some good points, and that we definitely need to get clarification of some of those points, particularly for a director that's only 11 months on the job and an agreement that's 45 years old. We are discovering some of the same things that he had just pointed out, at least since I've been here. I can tell you that the airport staff under our watch definitely intends to abide by all rules and regulations that we're bound to and that are enforceable, that we can enforce. I do think there is some clarification that needs to happen with the 1976 Joint Powers Agreement and with the Joint Powers Agreement with the City of Oxnard. There's two Joint Powers Agreements, and both of them need clarification. And I'm excited about the master plan because that is a platform to explore that.
When you said including this language that was proposed, this last sentence, the project must comply with the restrictions of the agreement except to the extent of the law, and I won't read the rest of it, you'd answer that it wasn't in the interest of the county. Is it not in your legal interest or economic interest, or what specific interest might you be alluding to?
I think I said best interest of the county. Is what I meant to say if I didn't. It is late, so I might have left out the word best, but the intent for me was to say the best interest of the county. And that is from a legal perspective, and I don't know, Tom, if you want to add to that.
Is there any reason why?
Could council add any additional clarification to that?
I don't know.
No.
Thanks, council. Additional comments, questions, discussion amongst authority members?
Supervisor.
Y'all look tired, but on the Camarillo City Council, man, this is early. We don't usually finish till like 1 or 2.
I'd like to make a motion, Mr. Chair, that we approve staff's recommendation 1 through 6. Do I need to read all the items 1 to 6? But that would be my recommendation. Of course, you know that we approve.
You can just state the recommended actions of 1 through 6.
1 to 6. And again, like I said, we've been working on this project for many, many years, you know, and and it was mentioned before, you know, there was no 737 aircraft, you know, they don't even fit in the hangars. You know, the Board of Supervisors did approve this item in the past, and this is 10 years in the making, and I think it's going to improve, you know, the enterprise fund here in the city of Camarillo, the airport of Camarillo, and I think it'll help the rest of the hangar owners and the operation of the in total Camarillo Airport, and I think it'll improve, you know, the Las Posas Road. You know, I think is one of the things that they were looking at, you know, from 101 to PV Road. But so my recommendation would be to approve items 1 to 6.
Staff recommendations.
To clarify, your motion is to move the recommended actions 1 through 6.
Yes.
Okay, I have a motion on the floor.
Second.
And I have a second. Yep.
Just one question of the individuals involved. If I was one of the few individuals with a 737 and I flew into this airport and I needed you to service or provide service, would you do it?
RKR is actually not a service base. I mean, it's storage hangars.
Whatever it is that you do, and if I needed it, would you do it, or would you discriminate against me bringing the plane in because it's too big?
I think that actually the Federal Aviation and RKR's position would be that that would be discrimination. We don't discriminate against any aeronautical users that are allowed to operate within the airport. As mentioned previously, 737s can operate under 115,000 pounds. The safe operating weight, empty weight of a 737 is 91,300 pounds. That's a delta of about 27,000 pounds that can be attributed to fuel and payload before it hits 115,000 pounds.
Thank
So,
you.
No.
Thank you.
First and a second.
All right, I have a first and a second. We will vote. All in favor of the suggested motion?
Aye.
Opposed? Nay. Does that mean you're opposed? Okay.
Two opposed.
Abstain? None. I have 3, 4, and 2 against, so it passes with majority, with myself and Mrs. Craven dissenting.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, can we receive it?
Everything
Can I move to receive and file everything else?
Second.
works. All right. Any additional comments from authority members?
My alarm's set for 3:45.
Mr. Perrello, I haven't adjourned yet, but Mr. Perrello has one comment.
Yeah, I'd very much like to say, Mr. Turner, this has been much better since you've been on board. And no disrespect to the previous manager, but a lot of positive things have come on since you've been on board.
guys.
Thank you.
Thank you for your good work.
All right. With that, we will adjourn the Airport Authority.